Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we sat down with China economic analyst Antonio Graceffo and Paz Gomez, researcher at Impunity Observer. They touch on the first female president in Honduras, how that could change diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and how the Chinese regime's economic stake in Latin America ripples over into the U.S. Let's dive in. Well, Antonio, thank you so much for joining us in person. Great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be here, Tiffany.
And so coming up, Honduras is having a new election, new president, and one of the issues is Taiwan. Honduras is one of the few countries that recognizes Taiwan and has a diplomatic relationship. So there's questions about if that's going to stay. So if it goes either way, what would happen? What would be the big issue?
Well, it's interesting that coincidentally the new leader of Honduras is named Castro, although not a relation to Fidel Castro, but she is known as a socialist. So there's a lot of speculation that she may switch recognition. Taiwan is down to 14 friends, I believe now, including the Vatican State, so 13 countries and the Vatican. And losing Honduras would be a big blow. And it's one of the few, there's a few countries in Central America and the Caribbean that are of reasonable size, and then almost all the other friends of Taiwan are tiny countries, you know, hundreds of thousands of people population. So it would be a real blow to Taiwan.
And so I think reports are noting that the White House has been kind of pushing Honduras not to cut the ties. So what would China gain if Honduras switches?
Well, as soon as they become friends with China, with the CCP, they'll get money. They'll probably get Confucius Institutes, they'll get scholarships. Recently I've done a lot of research on police exchanges. They will kindly, the CCP will kindly train the police of Honduras, and they will put CCP police there to help them learn how to police better. They give them these smart city, it's called safe city programs, where they put all these surveillance and facial recognition in their cities, and they'll even give them free of charge some CCP people to sit there and help them monitor it. And they've already done this in Latin America, other parts of Latin America. And I mean, this is all, you know, there's a long laundry list of things that Honduras could get out of the deal. What China gets out of it is every one of these things is one more foothold that they have very close to the American border.
Right, so you mentioned the kind of foothold and control that China would have over this area. So how would that impact the United States? Why are we so against it?
Well, one thing is we don't want China to get close enough to have listening posts where they can do observations and things. So my understanding is that there's one in Cuba, and it's manned by Chinese troops, and it's in Cuba. Now Honduras, if they could put a listening post there, they could observe, you know, how our ships are traveling, our patterns, figure out, because our Navy trains, of course, in the Caribbean, and they could find that out. Also, we're training, we're doing joint exercises with nations that we're friendly with, and so China would be able to observe those more easily. There's so many things they could do if they get close. I mean, they could have their own people or their agents be human trafficked into the United States through the southern border, for example. I mean, this is already happening, but it'd be even easier starting from Honduras.
And so you also touched on the economic front, and it seems like, and not just Honduras, but say all of Latin America, China has been investing a lot there. And so what, broadly speaking, what would China gain with all that investment? So
one of the things that China is doing that's very clever is that they're going right to the tree. When you want to find a good apple, you go right to the tree. So one of the things they're doing is they're offering scholarships for students, police, and military, but they're taking junior officers, young people. So they'll go to China, they'll have a good experience, and they'll always, maybe they'll learn to speak Chinese, and then they'll always be somewhat pro-China. So China will slowly and organically grow support in those countries from China. And of course, and they produce mega projects in these countries through the Belt and Road Initiative and through other programs. So basically these programs work like this. China will come and build a very highly visible infrastructure project. They will loan the host country the money to pay for the project. The host country will then use the money to pay Chinese companies to build the project. And now the host country is on the hook to China. They owe China money, they have to pay interest. And all the money has already come back to China through construction companies. And the projects that China builds are very generally, we call them mega projects now, and these are large infrastructure projects which are very visible So the average Honduran walks down the street, oh, look at this beautiful shopping mall that China gave us. Look at this highway. We didn't have a highway before. China gave us this sports stadium, all this. And when we compare and China calls it aid, which is madness because they're loaning it to the people. They're making a profit. When the U.S. gives aid, it's actually aid. And it's in the millions of dollars or hundreds of millions, whereas China's coming with billions of dollars. So for the average person, say, well, China is giving me billions, U.S. is giving me millions. I mean, obviously, I'd rather have billions, and that's what they're getting. They're building this goodwill, foothold, control over the government, agree with us on this UN resolution, and we'll give you some more money and that sort of thing.
So it sounds like China's almost buying its influence and, say, power on the world stage that way. Because I think some have also mentioned how much debt these countries have, right? You brought it up too. It's like to the U.S. maybe they only have a little debt. To Beijing they have a lot. And so when, say, big issues come up and the U.S. is like, oh, can you listen to us? They'll be like, no, I have these monetary gains. So what would be some ways of maybe stemming that risk?
That's a real problem. People always ask me about that. Well, if we want to keep these people as friends, we should give them more money than China gives them. It's like, that's not a friend, right? And I understand people are going to act in what they believe to be their best interest. But obviously taking these high interest loans from China, putting their country on the hook forever, is not in the people's best interest. And that's why we have places like Pakistan, where the people are furious with their government. And the average Pakistani hates China, hates everything about it. Their own government puts them on the hook for these. And one of the things about these mega projects is that they create corruption and support corruption. So it was really interesting. I was comparing in Pakistan, for example, the Chinese put, I forgot how many, it was like $20 billion, right? And the U.S. put something like, I don't know, 20 million or 10 million. What did China do? Oh, they built this, they built that. Well, when you're building construction, you're creating opportunities for corruption, cronyism, right? And this is all through the Americas as well. If you're going to build a highway, somebody has to have the contract to build the highway. Someone has to have the contract to put the cement, the food for the workers, And every step of the way, this is the cousin of the president, this is the friend of the cousin, this is the voting lobby. These people are all given these contracts, and each step of the way, a few dollars seem to just disappear, just go up in smoke. When they've done audits, the big, like the World Bank, big institutions have done audits of these projects. They're dramatically over budget. And that's why, because the government is not taking the best bidder. They're open bidding and they're taking the highest bidder because it's their cousin, and then some money's getting siphoned off. So this is going to happen in Honduras. I mean, this is happening all through the Americas, the countries that have already switched their recognition, and this will happen in Honduras next.
And so it sounds like for the U.S., this would be a very pressing issue. And I think last year there was a U.S. congressional hearing on the subject where Beijing's kind of gaining soft power, economic power, all these different leverages. So going forward, do you see there being a shift in the U.S. paying more attention to this issue?
I certainly hope so. When I was a soldier in the 80s and 90s, so our focus was primarily on Russia, and then number two was Latin America. And at that time you were having a lot of communist revolutions all through the Americas, and the U.S. was very focused on it. And the U.S. Southern Command used to be a lot larger. It was based out of Panama. And we've diminished the size of the Southern Command. We've handed the Panama Canal back to Panama, which was a lease agreement, and it's fair to give it back to them, but I think we definitely could have just renegotiated. We didn't have to take it by force or something. I'm not advocating that, but we probably could have negotiated something with them that would give them X amount of money and allow us to maintain the canal, but we didn't. So now you've got Chinese security companies on the canal. You've got, there's entire ports in Latin America now that have Chinese security. And moving forward, I really hope that the U.S. will switch some of its attention to this. And I just believe this Ukraine and Russia, I mean, it's just a real distraction. If you want to worry about that, okay, fine, but let's also spend some time worrying about Latin America. I mean, this is our backyard. I mean, Cuba, you're talking about 90 miles from the U.S. coast, and there's Chinese military there. There's Chinese military in Tierra del Fuego, in Patagonia and southern Argentina. You've got a listening post, a space station that's being manned by the PLA. We need to shift our attention to that area.
So you mentioned the proximity, how close Latin America is to America. And so what would be some other areas of concern? Like, why should the U.S. care what happens there?
Well, I mean, that's the primary one. And then the big picture, if you look at a very macro picture, voting rights in the EU, in the UN, every country gets one vote, regardless of the size of the country. So Taiwan was the one actually who invented that strategy a number of years ago. They're like, well, I can get all these Kiribati and all these little tiny countries, as friends. It's easy to get them as friends, and then you got one vote in the UN. But that's what China is doing. I mean, they're setting up these voting blocks. When the Xinjiang proposals for human rights in Xinjiang were brought before the UN, it was voted down by a group of 60 countries, all of whom were, BRI members. All of them owed money to China. So China's just building, it's like a politician running for office.
It sounds like China's buying those votes and then impacting other people without them even realizing it. So from, say, maybe the average Joe point of view, is there anything they could do to try and help?
As always, you need to petition your lawmakers. You need to bring this to your senators, your congresspeople, congressional representatives. You need to make them understand that this is very important and they need to address it. Now, a backdoor that you can use as an argument is that there's a lot of U.S. cities that have a sister city arrangement with a city in Central or South America. And most cities don't do very much with it, but somewhere in the city is a little plaque, we're the sister city of whatever in Peru. Use that, go to your mayor and say, listen, that city that we're sister city, they're getting taken over by communists. Maybe we can do something about it. But yeah, we need to get the word out. I think that's the big thing. The media is distracting us. And again, they're distracting us with Russia and Ukraine. I'm not saying it's not important, but this is very important and very immediate, and it's in our backyard. And because of the situation at the southern border, all sorts of Chinese agents and operatives are coming up through the southern border, and that needs to be stopped.
And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Latin America matters. China matters. China poses the biggest threat. I'm veteran of the Cold War, and I'll tell you, China poses a greater threat than Russia ever did. Russia never had the money. They never had the influence. Nothing. I mean, China is co-opting organizations all over the world at the very low level and at the very high level, and this absolutely needs to be addressed.
Well, Antonio, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany. It was great seeing you.
And joining us now from Ecuador, Paz Gomez. Paz, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning, Tiffany. Great to be here. And I'm glad to talk about, more Chinese influence in Latin America.
So a big story right now is the new president in Honduras, and one big part of that is Taiwan. So going forward, is Honduras going to switch diplomatic ties to Beijing? And if so, what would that mean? Why is it so significant?
Yes, well, Xiomara Castro, that is the president-elect for Honduras, told during her campaign that she was interested in shifting diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China. And this was especially related to her interest to finance ambitious infrastructure projects. And of course, the money is in Beijing. She also told during her campaign that China will open more economic opportunities, will open the chance to have more vaccines for COVID-19. And this was like her first announcement. Then immediately, people from the U.S. government talked with her and trying to persuade her and her team to think about the relationships with Taiwan, because of course, if you go with Beijing, you cut the other relationships with Taiwan. And basically, after that, around December 10, the team from Xiomara Castro told that they were thinking about what to do, that they were not trying just to cut off relationships with Taipei. And this is mainly related, I think, to the fact that, of course, cutting the relations with Taipei would also affect the relations with the United States, and the Honduran business elite would also have a say there. They would, of course, prefer to have relationships with the United States.
Now, it seems on the U.S. side, the White House has been suggesting Honduras to not switch diplomatic ties. So how would this impact the whole relationship with the U.S.?
During the last 5 years, Taiwan has lost important allies in Central America and the Caribbean, such as Panama, the Dominican Republic, recently Nicaragua. Of course, it is right now more like a dictatorship there. And I think that in this context, the United States is more worried about losing all the allies for Taiwan, and that China gains these allies. So in this sense, the United States saw as an emergency to try to suggest the new administration, the coming administration, to consider the relationships with Taiwan. Honduras is a key ally for the United States because of all the context related to migration. In this moment, Honduran migrants are one of the most huge, large groups that arrive to the southern border of the United States. And of course, as the United States has more influence in in Honduras, they have more chance to persuade them, like we will give more cooperation funds if you do this, or we can make some things like diplomatic ties and diplomatic strategies in which the United States can control and try to shape what economic and migration policy is Honduras taking. But if China gains more influence in Honduras, and the United States lost it, of course it is going to be more difficult, and the results on migration would be more difficult to manage from the United States.
So from the Honduras point of view, what benefit would they gain by switching to Beijing?
What is going to happen is that basically Honduras would have more political approach with China. I don't think that in the first scenario, Honduras has a lot to win from the commercial side, because in that sense, the United States is the main ally for Honduras, and even Taiwan has more importance, more relevance in commercial activity than China has for Honduras.
So you touched on the economic benefit that Honduras would gain by switching to Beijing. So expanding this out to all of Latin America, it seems the Chinese Communist regime has invested a lot there. And just last year here in the U.S., there was a congressional hearing on kind of the dangers around that, say the soft power and economic leverage. So going forward, how do you see this playing out?
Yes, well, right now, China is investing in infrastructure projects in several countries. Around 19 Latin American countries have ongoing projects of infrastructure. And this is part of the global strategy from China that is to become the superpower of this manufacture and infrastructure development. By doing this, China can gain some kind of power, of influential power in the region, and of course in the world if we extrapolate this. And also, since China wants, one of the advantages or benefits that China has is basically this manufacturing sector and industry. Basically, by doing this, China is also exporting these services, committing countries to become dependent of Chinese service providing these manufacturing sectors. So this would be like the direct effect. In the meantime, we're going to see that these infrastructure projects would need maintenance, would need further developments to increase productivity and things like that. And of course, the logical provider would be the Chinese companies that were already involved in these projects. While doing these infrastructure projects, China also provides credits. because or Latin American countries do not have the liquidity to finance these projects at once. So this also ties the countries with China. And in the case that some of them default, what could happen is that China gain more control of the management of these projects. And of course, loans are going to be more and more expensive in that sense. So that would be like the economic consequence if countries default. And finally, the other consequence is that as China gains more influence in these kind of projects in the region, they are also kind of removing key points for the United States. Not because the United States had been intervening like explicitly in the countries, but because at the end, if something happens in a geopolitical situation, the logical allies of the United States were the Latin American countries. If they have commitments with other countries, it will be more difficult for these countries to say, for example, Honduras, in the case that they decide to go with China, it is going to be more difficult to say, yeah, I logically support the United States, I logically support the Republican democratic system, because they have some commitments with China. And currently, this is happening in Honduras, even if they are not having explicit relations with China. According to the World Bank, right now, Honduras has 4% of its external debt with China and just 0.01% of the external debt with the United States. So those kind of things, of course, influence at the moment of taking decisions in the diplomatic realm. And that is going to happen with the rest of Latin American countries.
Paz, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany. Great to be here.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with China economic analyst Antonio Graceffo and Paz Gomez, researcher at Impunity Observer. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.